So to start off with the ring fire, I'm sure many of you are aware of it. It started on August 17th of 2013. Burned over 400 square miles, so it was a huge fire that we had to deal with. And a big part of this fire was the unusually high amount of high severity burn that occurred. If you look at this slide, the red represents where areas of burn were over 75 to 100% of the basal area of the live vegetation were toast. So it's a huge area of high severity that we were looking at restoring. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about what we did, the process that we took. Our first priority in this area was public safety. So we had about 194 miles of road out in this area that we wanted to restore so people could come back into the area. They're very interested in seeing the rimfire, also worker safety and employee safety. So we started with that, and we did salvage logging to basically remove those hazards. Next, we did a large-scale salvage logging project. We figured there's probably over 1 billion board feet of timber that were out in this area to log, and we ended up removing about 240 million of that. We left a lot of habitat for different species, whether it's black-backed woodpecker or some other things, but we really did want to emphasize leaving some of those structures long-term, see what would happen naturally. But we did treat some of this area that was really in this high-severity area, and we didn't feel we had a lot of opportunity for recovery that come back naturally. We also restored about 80 miles, reconstructed about 80 miles of roads out there. In addition to that, last March of 2015, we did 3 categorical exclusions that covered many thousands of, or a few thousand acres of recovery work. My colleague Margaret Lawrence is going to talk to you about the mountain lady slipper recovery that we did, protection out there. So we did things for meadows, springs, looking at great rail habitat, returning to this area. We also did lots of hand work for weeds. We removed about 450 pounds of weeds out there. So we did several different things that we wanted to restore out there. And we're still working on those. We have the NEPA done, which is sometimes our challenge is to get money for that. And now we're going to move into actually doing the implementation. So the next step is the reforestation piece. And what's really unique about the way we've approached it this time, we actually started doing collaboration with large groups of people in July of 2014. So we really want to do a lot of front-end public involvement. We met in Sacramento with many groups of environmentalists, the timber industry, researchers, and did all-day workshops, actually 2- and 3-day workshops, to basically talk to everybody and see what they had in mind. What did we do in the past that worked? What did we do in the past that didn't work? And what do we want to do in the future, and what people's concerns were and really wanted to see out there in this landscape. So of course for us, the number one thing, this is the rimfire area. There's been 20 large fires within this landscape since 1944. Obviously it's a fire adapted landscape or not adapted landscape. So that was our number one concern. So to that end, the forest actually in October of 2013, before the fire was even out, we gathered researchers, fuels officers, fire management specialists. We got them together and said, okay, if we reforest this area, how can we ensure long-term that we can actually get a forest to old forest, 100 years, 150 years? And so we did a strategy for vegetation resiliency out here. That was our number one priority. So the purpose and need of our project, this reforestation project, is we of course want to return next conifer to this forest. We also want to create wildlife habitat. 46 spotted owl packs were impacted during the rimfire. Some of them are, burned moderate, low intensity. They're in great shape. Some of them were completely burned up and gone. We also impacted great gray owl habitat as well as goshawk habitat. And the recovery plan for the fisher coming out of Yosemite National Park, the corridor that comes through the Stanislaus, was also part of that high severity burn area. So we want to return that old forest structure to this area. We want to do fuels resiliency. Again, we talked about that. Number one priority is to reduce those fuels out there before we do any sort of reforestation, because we want to be able to maintain these forests long term. We have deer enhancement area right smack in the middle of the rimfire is the Jawbone Ridge. It's almost 4,000 acre area for deer where they come out of Yosemite National Park and they winter there. And then of course eradicate noxious weeds was another thing that we really wanted to pay attention to while we're out there. So our proposed actions include that deer habitat enhancement, say it's almost 4,000 acres. Noxious weed eradication is almost 6,000 acres in this area. We want to do thinning of plantations. One of the things people believe within the rimfire is all those older plantations that you planted from those past fires burned up. Well, we had about 21,000 acres out there that burned. only about a third of them are actually going to be reforested. The rest of them actually survived, did very well, and we're going to thin them. And it's actually one of the more exciting parts about this project is we can create some of that structure that we really want to look at long term. And then reforestation, of course, about 21,000 acres, and natural regeneration. We had areas with, we have pockets of trees that burn completely, but we have some green within those areas. We have some green adjacent to those areas, so we really want to monitor natural regeneration. So the deer habitat enhancement, like I say, it's an important critical deer winter range. So we're going to plant pockets, about 5 to 25 acre pockets of conifers out there for thermal and hiding cover. The emphasis out in this area certainly is the oak woodland for mast and brush for feed for these deer, but we definitely want to provide that cover and need to bring that back in. We have huge noxious weed problem out in this area, multiple noxious weeds. Unfortunately, Medusa head is one of them and several others. We're working with UC Extension to do an integrated pest management program out there using grazing, burning, herbicides, lots of monitoring to try to eradicate that weed out in that area. And then prescribed fire, really important for us to bring prescribed fire back in there to keep that brush and the species supple and good feed for the deer out there. And also we have lots of existing plantations, again, that didn't burn in this fire. They're older. We want to thin those out, really create that structure, promote those oaks, and provide what those deer need out in this location. Noxious weed eradication is a huge part of this project. It's almost 6,000 acres that we want to do out there. Mostly, unfortunately, it's not all the weeds out within the rimfire perimeter. That's just within the reforestation units and adjacent to the reforestation units. So it's not all of the weeds, but it's a big chunk of weeds out there. We have about over 20 different species of weeds that we're looking at eradicating. We're using hand where we can and manual, mechanical means to remove these weeds, but there's several species, which I'm sure many of you have worked with, that are going to require some herbicides out there to eradicate them, and we really do want to remove them. It's a long-term project that we're looking at out there to get rid of these species. Any of the existing plantations I mentioned, there's about 12,000, a little over 12,000, almost 13,000 acres actually of plantation within. And this is probably one of the most exciting parts for me, because we have this structure that we can actually create whatever we want now. And if you've read GTR 220 and some of the latest research on forest and forest structure, we're going to create these individual trees, these clumps, and these openings out in these areas, and really create that mosaic of heterogeneity across the landscape. They might not look they probably look pretty homogeneous right now, but in the not so distant future, we'll look at that landscape and that structure that we really want. And we have the ability to create it because we have these stands that are stocked at this time. So one of the questions a lot of people ask us is why reforest? Just let it come back naturally. And for us, really the answer is, look at this top slide here. This is Forest Service land. This is after the '87 fire. It burned very well and very hot. Also, close to this area, across from the Groveland Ranger District office. And after 1987, we planted that area. This is private property here. You can kind of see that line pretty distinctly. And you can see what's come back since '87. It's a very nice white leaf manzanita field. There are a few ponderosa pine out there, and there are some gray pine, but it's not quite to the level of forest that we'd like to see. So that's one of the reasons we're reforesting. And we're looking at more of a short timeline. 60 to 100 years is when we'd like to get forests back out on this landscape. If we wanted to wait a couple centuries, yep, we'll get some forest back out there. But I think for us, it's a little more quicker that we'd like to be out there. What we really want to do and how we do it is different than we did historically. We really want to learn from what we did in the past. As you can see, that other plantation that was successful, but probably not the structure that we want today. Back then, we were looking at 100% occupancy. We planted that. We probably interplanted it twice to get the number of trees out there to make sure that we had full site occupancy, growing timber, growing trees. That's not where we're at today. We really want to understand the role of fire on this landscape, and we want to reintroduce fire very quickly back into this landscape. Our goal is to actually reintroduce fire to these areas at year 10. So very young plantations going to have fire back in the landscape. I can tell you we haven't done that in these 40-year-old plantations. And we're going to work with our stakeholders. A lot of people are very interested in what we do out there. Timber industry, of course, is interested. Our Arnoa community is very interested. And then our local community is very interested. Recreation, forests, very big part of our community out here in Tuolumne and Mariposa counties. And we want to use the best available science. So we're working very closely with PSW, our Pacific Southwest researchers, to find out what we should be doing and how to do it. So our proposed action, another part of it was, again, the fire resilient system. So we really want to understand when fire comes back through this landscape, that it's low or moderate intensity, not this high intensity level. You know, pockets of that, no problem. In this area, normal, 2 acres to 22 acre pockets of high intensity, totally normal. 300 acre pockets of high intensity, not very normal. So that's really what we want to look at in the future. So to that end, we have established where we want to put fuel breaks, where we want to put emergency travel routes, primary ridges, how we plant these areas, to be really conscious of how we put trees back on this landscape and how we can, you know, move forward with that. Reforestation, we have a lot of different things we're doing in reforestation. On another slide we'll talk to that, but you know, it's pretty traditional. We're looking at some site prep. This is obviously a fire adapted landscape, so we have a lot of species coming back, so we'll do some site prep, we'll plant, and then we'll have, we are proposing herbicides out here because of the sprouting nature of many of the species that we have in this location. We have bear clover, deer brush, manzanita sprouting and seeding, and several others. Natural regeneration, like I say, is a big part of our proposal. Over 4,000 acres we're looking at natural regeneration on. And what that includes for us is monitoring. Unfortunately, we had some pretty nice areas of green that did survive the fire. Unfortunately, fourth year of drought, a lot of those areas have died. So we don't have that seed source like we had even 2 years ago. So we'll be monitoring. We hope we'll get that natural regeneration. If we don't, we'll come back in and reforest it. So our planting strategies, again, very different than we did historically. We're looking at working with UC Berkeley, looking at a researcher. We're looking at moving up our level of seedlings 500 feet. So in order to kind of adapt to climate change, because we know it's getting hotter. It might be a little wetter, but it's getting hotter. Either way, it's going to be drier. So we're going to do that. Historically, we planted anywhere from 435 to 680 trees per acre out of these landscapes. And then we interplanted. So we were determined to have trees out there on this landscape, just trees. Today, that's not what we're looking at doing. About 344 trees per acre is probably the max number of trees we plant out there. We want to reintroduce fire and plantations at year 10. Really important for us, again, is to get that fire back on this landscape. We're looking at buffers adjacent to roads, and that's basically for fire, egress, ingress. That's our fire and fuels folks really like to see. There's a few other buffers I'm going to talk about, as well as some different planting patterns. So oaks, huge part of this landscape. Many of you have been out in older forests, and the black oak component's pretty much gone. We're going to have a 25-foot buffer, no planting buffer, on 5 oaks per acre, because we really want to maintain the structure long term, and we believe the 25 feet will get us what we need until we get to a commercial thin, and then we can again thin away from those oaks to provide that area for those oaks to thrive. Meadows. We talked about doing a 100-foot buffer on all meadows, just flat out. We decided because this is a huge great gray owl area, lots of habitat, lots of owls within the rimfire. We wanted to make sure we had some structures back in. So what we determined is 0 to 25 feet, nothing, no planting, no trees. 25 to 50 feet, we're going to plant little groups of 5, little clusters of 5 trees, every 150 feet around it, and then 50 to 100 feet out, looking at clusters of 10. And again, get some of those trees to survive and have that long-term structure for those great gray owls out here in this area. Very important. We have lots of different planting structures that we proposed. We looked at clumps of trees, we looked at spacing between clumps, we looked at large clumps, small clumps. So those are all part of our proposal to figure out how do we get land back on this, or trees back on this landscape. And I'll be really quick in the summary. So in the end, we have proposed action, and we have lots of comments during scoping, which was awesome, and working with our publics. We ended up with 5 alternatives. We just talked mostly about alternative 1 is the proposed action. Those are the numbers. Alternative 2 is no action, so lots of zeros. Alternative 3 is no herbicides. Very similar numbers to alternative 1. The difference is with noxious weeds, we just didn't feel that we could basically eradicate them without herbicides. So those numbers dropped a little bit. Alternative 4 deals with founder stands, where we're looking at planting 2 to 10 acre clusters of trees, clumps of trees, 20% across each unit. using fire in between those clusters of trees long term, and then having those grow up, and those will seed the areas adjacent to it over the long term. So again, about 20% of the area, that's why the number's low, and a huge prescribed burning number, because we do a lot of fire in between those areas every decade. And Alternative 5 kind of took us back a little bit to, I'll call it more traditional forestry. We didn't worry too much about the structure we'd initially plant. This plant on a 7x14, but with mortality, which will be about 20, minimum mortality about 25% with herbicides, about 50% without herbicides is what we know from past experience out in this location. And then we use pre-commercial thin if we need to. The other alternatives don't use pre-commercial thinning. We're really looking at commercial thinning as our first entry into these areas, just because historically we sometimes don't get the money or don't want to have to count on it. So, questions?
How is the recent Ponderosa, I'm over here by the way.
Oh, thank you.
The recent Ponderosa die-offs in the area affected your strategy at reforesting, and specifically how have you kind of changed your plan to try to cope with that or avoid that in the future?
Yeah, for us, it hasn't changed our plan too much. Again, I think when I talked about the natural regeneration units, those will be the areas we'll be monitoring. We're going to monitor them anyway, but I think we probably will have to do a little more reforestation. We certainly are planting, like I say, fewer trees, more ponderosa pine in these areas, raising that seed, the seed source up 500 feet. Those are kind of some of the things we've talked about for that. We are planting multiple species, but in this landscape, because it is so hot and dry, it's mostly ponderosa pine that we'll be doing in those lower elevations for sure.
Hi. I was just wondering if you mentioned commercial thinning. Are there any ideas on whether that's going to be profitable for the timber companies?
Well, that's the key, right? So they're not going to pay for it if it's not profitable. They're pretty clear on how they do business. So yes, that's the hope, is that it would be profitable for the timber industry. And again, it's far fewer trees per acre, and because of the mortality and some other things out there, we think we'll get that structure, and we think we can get to that point. So that's the goal. But I started on the Stanislaus in 1989 after the 87 fires, and what we planted back then and what we're planting to do today, very different. So who knows what the industry will be into and at and be utilizing them. But we hope to get there.
How did you derive for burning young plantations, how did you come up with 10 years? Because in general, many of them at that age are very grassy, herbaceous, fine fuels, burn hot.
Yeah, that's a great question. We didn't think we could get in there any earlier. But we are going to be using herbicides to kind of maintain some of that brush. And we think with the grass, we know we're going to have some mortality, and that's just okay. But we also think at that age, we're not going to burn the whole area. We're going to introduce fire in pockets and spots throughout the area. And we're going to live with the mortality we get. But we really believe on this landscape especially, well, all landscapes, but this landscape in particular, really need to do that. So we're looking at the mortality, working with our fuels guys. They're not totally comfortable with that, and they don't like giving an age because it's going to be the conditions that are out there that allow us to do that. But it's going to be light touch. But we really think if we don't do that, long term, we're going to have other issues out there.
I was really excited to hear that you're looking at the GTR 220 for your thinning of existing stands. But it looked to me like a lot of the planting looks to be done on more of the traditional grid kind of pattern with hopefully thinning later. Is there any plan to try to plant more according to the ICO protocols?
Well, actually, the proposed action that went out is pretty much the GTR 220. So it has clumps and groups and all that. So it really looked at that. We've talked to, what our struggle is how do you do that? How do you get people to actually plant in those patterns? And then the other thing we've talked about, is it necessary? Because really, like I say, those early plantation pictures that I showed you of what we did historically, those were interplanted and we really strove to get 100% occupancy. And I think today we know that just through our mortality, through seedlings that aren't well adapted to the site, drought, and other things, we're gonna get those pockets, those individual pockets in that structure. And just leaving the areas around oaks is gonna give us that, around meadows. So really, that's kind of where I'm thinking. Like I said, we haven't made a decision, our decision maker is thinking, still looking at planting different patterns and different things. But for me, I think if you look at 25% mortality as a minimum, which really is what, based on our many years of records out in this location, I think we're going to get that ICF structure with that. If we, if we interplant it, yeah, we are. So, because it's really hard to do it. If you can help me figure out how to get a contractor to plant in that structure, I'd love to talk to you, because really that's our struggle.
Do we have time for one more question?
No, we're over. You can, Patty.